Hey, what's up everybody? Just want to do a little short video on the new Dravtech shocks that I got. 3.5 inch, 3 3/4 and 4 inch shocks now. So a lot of people have been buying the 3.5 inch shocks, been super happy with them. I have not run them on all my cars. The reason why I haven't run the Dravtech shocks on this before is because I've run 3 3/4 inch shocks. Obviously Dravtech's only come in 3.5s. So now that I got 3 3/4, I couldn't be happier. And you're probably saying, well, what's the big deal, right? Why do you have to have a 3 3/4? Why can't you just have a 3.5 inch and throw some longer rod ends and be good to go? Well, that's what this whole video is going to be about. But I've got a 3.5 inch shock here, and what I've done is I've cut away. Let's see, I've cut away the inside of the shock body so you can see what's happening here. So if you take just a normal shock shaft and piston, slide it in there. If you are driving your car and your shock is in this position, which it very well could be, and probably is in a lot of situations, here's what your shock oil and your piston's doing. It's going like this. So what's the big deal? Well, there's no oil right there. If you do that, there's no oil going through the holes in the piston. And that's what the whole purpose is. So here's what I like to do. Throw a tiny inch spacer on the shaft, so it limits it below the piston. You don't get in the way of the piston holes. So now if you throw it back in there, do the same thing. Now, if you're sitting there with your shock fully extended, now you got oil. Oil is going through the piston. So before, at the bottom, there's no oil. I don't know how long it takes for there to be oil. I mean, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, how much oil it takes to actually make the piston work. But for me, that's why I like the 3 3/4. The 3 3/4, I put a 1/4 inch spacer underneath that piston, and I've got a full 1/4 inch worth of oil underneath that pinion, or that piston, when it bottoms out. So that's the biggest reason. If you've got room, ideally I think you want to do a 4 inch shock. Same reason. So you limit under the piston, so when you're going like so, it's gonna have oil. But also when you come up to the top, right here, you don't want to be into the bladder. The bladder's way more forgiving than the bottom of the shock. But if you're coming in there and you're hitting that bladder, there's not a lot of oil going on, and the bladder itself is going to cause a little resistance. It's going to cause some problems. So if you can, I mean, shoot, if you can fit a 3.5 inch shock and you like to travel of a limited 3.5 inch shock, you could do an 1/8 inch limiter underneath here, and you could do an 1/8 inch limiter underneath the piston, and you're going to be good to go. You'll be riding in this range here, right in the middle, the sweet spot where there is oil. So ideally, you just don't want to run on the bottom, don't want to run on top. That's where you're running out of oil. Your shock's going to be less consistent that way. So what am I talking about? When do you run out of shock travel? Shock's fully extended, and that's probably what you look like when you're climbing. So that piston's right there, and that's what your piston's going to be in the bottom, bottoming out right there. So it's going to be climbing like this. So you want that thing to be in oil as much as possible. So if you can understand that, then the rears are fully collapsed. They're not a big a deal because they're not going to be bottomed out. If you're climbing like this and your shocks are fully extended, I mean, you got a link geometry problem. You got to fix that. So they should be compressed a little bit. They should be riding right here, which is almost the middle of the shock. So the rears aren't as critical, but same thing. I like to make sure there's just oil throughout the travel, no matter what I'm doing. You know, sometimes you could be climbing like this where you're flexed out, and you just want your shocks to be working all the time. So that's pretty much it. But I also just wanted to do another little shock tip, which is people will tell you to put the shock bodies down at the bottom like this. They say to do it for weight. For me, that's it's debatable. I've never been able to figure out exactly how much weight you're flipping upside down. Might be a gram or two, who knows. The biggest reason I do it, again, is when you're on that climb and you're going like this, then if you do have air in your shock, your air is going to go up. It'll go up here where the bladder is, and your piston's right here again. So your piston won't be working in air. Your shock will be constantly working in oil right there. The air will be up here. So, and you know, the rear is going to be the same thing. I've got my rears with the bodies up just because it likes to clear the chassis right there a little easier. But you know, if you're doing this, the air will go up to the top. Piston's about right here, so you're not going to be in air. But it doesn't matter on the backs. You can flip them upside down. It's going to be pretty much in the middle, so it doesn't really matter as much. So that's exactly why I'm making a 3 3/4 and a 4-inch shock. If you can, put limiters on them. Even if you're running 3.5s, try to run limiters on them. Probably run out of travel because a 3.5-inch shock to me is the perfect amount of travel. So consider the 3 3/4, consider the 4-inch. You know, if you're a chassis builder and you're watching this, maybe you've never considered making a chassis with a longer than a 3.5-inch shock. Sometimes it's not possible, but if it is possible, get the longest shock you can possible in there so you can have the travel you want with the limitations, and then your piston's always going to be in oil. So that's it. Pick up your Dravtech shocks at dluxfab.com. Get your required size, 3.5, 3 3/4, and 4-inch.